I got up from where I sat, for what seemed an age. The city appeared darker than before, as if the clouds had suddenly appeared and blocked out the sun. Maybe this was the fine particles of the radioactive fog, but whatever it was, it felt eerie, ominous, deadly. I kept expecting rain to suddenly fall from the sky, as it had done whilst I was in the cave, way back when, I can't remember, but instead a light, slow drizzle fell and began to coat this dead city. Even the guards of the general looked lost, but I had little sympathy for them, as I expected they had for me. I'm sure they'd rather the general had survived. Nothing was spoken whilst I was in the van with them, but it was the silence. If I could read their thoughts, I'm sure they were cursing me, blaming me. But I felt no shame nor guilt at his death, as he had only reaped what he himself had sowed. I walked through the streets, which had once been full of joy and life. I saw people crying and wailing on the streets, clutching to rags and their children. They had experienced what I had all that time ago, but I had no words to offer them. I myself was still not over the consequences of the dead city. I found myself leaning up against the shiny car that appeared from the outside not to be too damaged, but inside I could not say the same. A man sat clutching what looked like his rib cage. His left hand was held against a closed glass window. The window nearest me was open. I tried to comfort him, to speak to him softly, but I found myself lost for words. It was not a situation one was trained for. Indeed, one had come up against all that often. To make matters worse, I could not hold his hand, as the nearest one to me was already occupied. His face was badly scarred, blackened like charcoal. His eyes, weak and insipid, looked upon me. He asked me to pass him a cigarette, which I found on the floor by his feet. I placed it in his swollen lip, also black. As he asked me to light the cigarette, the pupils in his left eye rolled up, and I never saw it again. I can only assume that I had witnessed his eyes going blind. He started to quiver and shouted as much as he could, with a gravely voice, "Give me a light." I took no offence in his tone due to his condition, but smelling the petrol that was pouring from his car, I told him I could not find it. But I had, and I carefully removed it with my hand, making sure I passed his left eye, which I knew could not see anything hidden within the clasp of my hand. I told him I would go into a shop across the road and find one. I walked off, and each footstep away I contemplated what I was going to do, whether indeed I would return back. Could I face what I had seen again? These steps seemed so fake and slow. Then I sped up. I had nearly reached the shop when I heard his voice call out, "It's okay, I've got one." With that I turned round to see a glimpse of him light his cigarette before the car, draped in oil, blew up in my face and sent me straight through the shop window and onto broken glass on the floor. I got up, and from the shop I could see the car burning brightly. I could hear pops and squeals too. I hoped those squeals were the sound of the metal reacting to the heat, but they could have easily been mistaken for the cries of a man being consumed by fire. I found a rucksack on the floor by my feet. I dusted it off and filled it with some tinned food, with a tin opener that was hanging close by. I left the shop by its new entrance, and decided I would need to find a place to sleep. Not ever wanting to sleep on the floor again, I broke into a house. I thought it was empty. Unbeknown to me, there was a family in the living room, which I found, and my face must have gone red with true embarrassment. It was strange to find people in houses anymore, almost like it used to be. I found the family huddled around some in a bed. It was an elderly woman. I did not have the nerve to ask what was the matter with her. To be honest, whilst I stood there staring, they continued with her as if I was not there. The woman was obviously dying. They held a cold flannel on her head and held her hand, speaking to her gently. One of them, maybe her daughter, explained to her mother that she was dying, that she would only have a few hours, maybe less, to live. I thought it was quite a harsh but brave thing to do. I wondered if I were in the same situation whether I could break this news. But it was the elderly woman's right to know. She smiled and looked at them, with her weary eyes. I felt a tear fall as I watched this family's tragedy. I wondered what the woman's thought patterns as she knew she was dying. Possibly early on she was okay, doing the everyday normal things she would have done. Now she had the last moments of her life thrusted upon her. How could one's mind cope with such a thing? Was she going over her life? Was she in too much pain? But just grit her teeth and bear it, just wishing the final moment to come. Did she get pains in her heart thinking that was it only to open her eyes again and wait the final bow? I could take it no longer and left the house so that they could grieve in peace, alone. I walked up the street. The guards were getting in the van. I went up to the driver and asked for a lift. He didn't answer me, but gave a small nod. So I got inside and he drove up the road, out of the city and in a northerly direction, as I too had been travelling since I left the dead city.